Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. As price rises bite into budgets, many people are cutting back on the weekly food shop. As well as buying less, people are looking for ways to make their money go further and to make the most of what they have. We're going to be covering 5 ideal tips to give you a starting point. So first one is 1. Keep track of what you already have. Rosie suggests taking a good look at your cupboards before each shopping trip. We all know the value of making lists, but if you're adding to what you've already got in your cupboards, then you're going to spend more money on things you don't need, she says. There's no point in buying more jars of pasta sauce if you've already got 5 of them in the cupboard. She keeps a list of what's in her cupboards in a notebook, so she always knows what she already has and what she needs when she goes shopping. She said it has helped bring her weekly food shop for her husband and 1-year-old son down to around £40. 2. Head for the reduction section first. Lynn recommends changing how you shop when you walk into a store and head straight for the reduced section. If you spot something that's on your list, you can tick that off and you've already saved some money, she says. She suggests then going straight into the frozen food section and then the canned produce aisle. Frozen meat, fish and vegetables will almost always be cheaper than a fresh option. If you get what you need from there, before going on to the fresh produce aisles, you're likely to make significant savings. Third tip, make better use of your freezer. According to sustainability charity Wrap, the average household wastes around £700 every year by throwing food away. Lynn says making better use of her freezer has helped her cut down dramatically on waste. If things are getting closer to their use-by date, you should always try to freeze them, she says. You'll also be able to buy things cheaper in supermarkets that are close to their sell-by date. Things like milk and cheese, even fruit and vegetables, can all be frozen and kept for when you need them. Kate Hall, who runs the Full Freezer website, uses her freezer as a pause button rather than a long-term storage solution. She says that whilst almost all foods can be frozen, you do have to change the way you use them. You can't defrost a banana or salad and expect it to be the same as when it went into the freezer, she explains. But if you think about how you could use it in puddings or in soups or in casseroles, then you're going to save a lot of money. Tip 4. Understand packaging. Rosie says that a lot of what we buy in the supermarket is packaged for their convenience and not ours. How often have you bought a tray of mushrooms covered in cling film only to have them go off in their packaging? They're wrapped up like that to make them easier to transport, she explains. She puts hers in a paper bag when she gets them home, but says just taking them off the plastic wrapping will help them last longer. Helen White from Wrap, which runs the Love Food Hate Waste campaign, says there are small things we can do to make food last longer, especially fresh vegetables and salads, the UK's most wasted food group. Just putting a piece of kitchen roll into an open bag of salad to absorb moisture is going to help it last longer, she says. Keeping fruit in the fridge will help it last longer, but she suggests checking that the temperature is set to below 5 centigrade. We think millions of UK fridges are at least 2 degrees too warm, she says. This is bad news for milk and other food items kept in the fridge, which can go off more quickly when not stored at the right temperatures. And 5. Make use of experts. Rosie tries to use local, smaller retailers a lot to tap into their years of experience. Butchers are a great resource and someone who shouldn't be afraid to talk to about saving money. She says, if you go into your local butcher and tell them you've only got £8 for your meat for the week, they'll be able to tell you how to stretch your money by buying the cheapest cuts. They're the best people to advise on how to cook them and how to make them go further. Hello and welcome to News by Standards. A 16-year-old boy who wore a red dress to his school prom has said it was surreal. It's been seen more than 7 million times on social media. Corbin stepped out in a sequin tuxedo and ball gown skirt to loud cheers from pupils and staff at Archbishop Sancroft High School in Halston, Norfolk. His mum, Nina Green, tweeted a photo and said she was incredibly proud he was being true to himself. Corbin said it sends a message: you can be who you want to be. Miss Green said she wanted to show him living his best life and had no idea her positive message would go crazy in this way. As soon as he got out of the car, everyone just cheered and I was crying. Some of the teachers were crying because he was being who he wanted to be, she said. Everyone has been very supportive and his year group has been incredible. If you let your child be who they are, and then you'll get nothing but the best out of them. There are people in the world who still don't understand, but the feeling of acceptance, you can't beat that feeling. I'm so happy for him. The next day they were heading to Pride in London when Miss Green's phone went crazy. Her tweet had been retweeted more than 4,000 times, including by one of Corbin's idols, RuPaul's Drag Race star Michelle Visage, who said he was a star. Corbin said it was very surreal Visage had shared the pictures of him. To me, she is such an icon, a wonderful celebrity, and I really admire her, he said. When I showed Corbyn the retweet, he was absolutely blown away. He was so made up, said Mrs. Green. We also had retweets from H, from Steps, and Dr. Range. It was amazing. Then at Pride, someone in the march came up to him and said, "Are you the boy in the red dress? I think you're amazing." Mrs. Green said Corbyn had always loved wearing dresses and since his early teens had performed as sassy drag queen Miss Frofro. But when it came to his prom, he wanted to keep Miss Frofro at home, she added. He wanted to go as himself while expressing his feminine side, with a tuxedo on the top and a dress at the bottom, very much influenced by American actor Billy Porter. He wanted to be Corbyn but in a dress. She added that the response since has been incredible, with one parent even messaging Mrs. Green for advice on supporting her own son, who had recently come out. "I just want to show parents in the same situation that it's okay," she said. "I think it's so important to fly the flag for people who don't get the support he does. I really hope it will help others be more accepting, let proud parents feel they are not alone and that they can celebrate their children, and for young people to know there is a network there if they need it. You need to accept your children for who they are." A growing wildfire in California is threatening the largest grove of giant sequoias in Yosemite National Park. The Washburn fire has doubled in size over the past 24 hours and is now estimated to have burned 1,591 acres. Firefighters are working in difficult terrain to protect some of the largest and oldest redwood trees in the world. Residents and campers near the fire have been evacuated, and thick smoke has worsened the region's air quality and obscured the park's scenic views. The blaze, which started on the 7th of July, threatens at least 500 giant sequoias in the Mariposa Grove, including the famed grizzly giant, which is thought to be around 3,000 years old. For now, none of them have been destroyed by the fire. The Yosemite Fire and Aviation Management Department said it was proactively protecting the grove by setting up a sprinkler system to increase humidity around the trees and by removing potential fuels from the site. The Washburn fire has already forced nearly 1,600 people to evacuate the area, including the Wawona community located inside the national park and hundreds of campers staying close to Wawona. The cause of the fire is still being investigated. Fire officials say that warm and dry weather conditions are making it difficult to control the flames. Giant sequoias are some of the biggest trees on the planet. The largest is 83 meters or 275 feet tall and over 11 meters or 36 feet in diameter at the base. Their extraordinary longevity, they can live to around 3,000 years, also makes them among the oldest living things on Earth. The Mariposa Grove holds a historic place in American history as the first scenic natural area to be protected by the federal government for public use, resort and recreation. The legislation was signed by President Lincoln in 1864. Last year, thousands of giant sequoias were destroyed by forest fires in California. Officials say that more than 35,000 wildfires have burned across the US so far this year, which is well above average. Warmer temperatures and more extreme drought conditions caused by climate change are making wildfires more common. A new species of giant water lily has been discovered, and it's been hiding in plain sight for 177 years. The huge plant had been in the archives of the Royal Botanical Gardens, Kew, and was growing in a number of aquatic collections, but it was mistakenly identified as another species. Now a detailed scientific study has revealed that it is new to science. It also holds the record as the world's largest water lily, with leaves growing more than 3 meters or 10 foot wide. The plant has been called Victoria boliviana, named after Bolivia, where it grows in a single water basin in part of the Amazon River system. Horticulturalist Carlos Magdalena, one of the world's leading water lily experts, long suspected that the plant was different from the other two known giant species, Victoria amazonica and Victoria cruzunia. So scientists from Bolivia, from the National Herbarium of Bolivia, Santa Cruz Botanic Gardens and Public Botanic Garden La Rinconada, donated some seeds to Kew. He told BBC News it meant we could grow it side by side with the two other species under exactly the same conditions. Once we did this, we could very clearly see that every single part of the plant was totally different. He described the find as the highlight of his career. Working alongside Carlos, botanical illustrator Lucy Smith made detailed scientific drawings of all three species. This also involved heading into the glasshouse at night because water lily flowers only come out in the dusk. She said, "I was able to get access to the flowers, and also by looking at the leaves, I could, as an illustrator, highlight those differences that I saw. And in fact, while I was drawing those differences, they became even stronger in my mind, and I found new ways of telling them apart." She added, "Maybe I'm biased, but one of the three species, I think the new species, has one of the most beautiful flowers." Kew has a long history with the plants. The water lily house was built in 1852 to showcase its collections. The giants discovered in the 1800s were a natural wonder of the age, and the genus was named after Queen Victoria. But the new discovery shows that water lilies still have some surprises, and scientists say there is still much to learn about them. Dr. Alice Monroe from RBG Kew explained none of these three species species have been very well studied. We still don't know how many populations there are and how much they vary in size. We don't really understand the pollination biology very well. We don't know a lot about the dispersal of the species, how it transmits itself from one space to another, so there are still many unknowns. And I think because they're so huge, Sylvius people haven't really thought to study them in that much detail. Argentina's economy minister Martin Guzman has resigned as the country's economic crisis intensifies. Mr. Guzman has been in office since late 2019 and led negotiations with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) over the restructuring of Argentina's debt. He called for political agreement within the governing coalition to choose his successor. Argentina is struggling with 60% inflation and a weak currency, as well as global food and energy price rises. Mr. Guzman stepped down after a week of economic turmoil, with the Argentine peso sliding against the dollar. His departure leaves a big question mark over Argentina's future economic policy. In a letter to President Alberto Fernandez, Mr. Guzman hinted at internal divisions within the government, but it is no secret that President Fernandez is at odds with his deputy, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, over how to tackle the country's economic problems. In fact, Mr. Guzman announced his resignation whilst Ms. Fernandez was giving the latest in a series of high-profile speeches lambasting her own government's economic policies. Ms. Fernandez, who was herself president from 2007 to 2015, is critical of what she sees as the government's failure to ease the financial burden on ordinary Argentines. She and her supporters said Mr. Guzman as excessive in his efforts to reduce the budget deficit and tighten monetary policy. If Ms. Fernandez gets her way, the new finance minister will go easy on the fiscal rigour and increase the level of state intervention in the economy. But that might prove a bitter pill for the IMF to swallow, with some financial analysts already criticising the fund for not setting tough enough conditions in its latest $44 billion debt deal with Argentina. On the 27th of February, Karl Sprogus and his wife Jill spent most of the night anxiously monitoring flood height data from Australia's Bureau of Meteorology. Their town Lismore was caught in the catastrophic floods that submerged southern Queensland and northern New South Wales in February and March. Those floods have become the most costly in the nation's history, according to the Insurance Council of Australia. The latest flooding to hit Australia came at the weekend when Sydney was hit with torrential rain. Thousands were told to evacuate their homes and roads were cut by deep water. Back in February, perched on a hill, the Sprogus family home was safe, but the couple were worried about their downtown physiotherapy business. It was purposely located on the second floor, but even that was not enough. From the water height charts, they could tell the office was going to be inundated, but it was too late to save anything. The authorities had already issued an evacuation order. "We could have put things up higher at that time had we known it, but we didn't," said Mr. Sprogus, who had been at his practice the night before. "I even left my new laptop on the office desk, thinking, well, the water's never been in here before, so it won't come on in." By the following day, his practice was 1.8 metres underwater, files, records and equipment all damaged or lost. Meanwhile, in New South Wales, in Gibberaggi, children's book author Candy Lawrence watched as 2,000 copies of her books were sucked into the deluge. Miss Lawrence had been carefully watching government floods warnings and gathering supplies, anticipating that nearby roads would be cut off, as often happened when the area flooded. But like Mr. Sprogus, she was not expecting waters to sweep through her property and that of her neighbours, some of whom had to scramble onto their roof to escape the fast rising floodwaters. "I feel like the world is pretty much ending, so why bothering educating children?" she says, referencing her destroyed book collection and the terrifying new weather patterns. Like thousands of others caught in the disaster, Mr. Sprogus and Miss Lawrence would have liked more warning, so why wasn't there a better system which could alert them in real time if their properties were in danger? Julia Murphy, a water resources engineer specialising in hydrology and flooding, asked this after watching her friend's house in Brisbane flood over the roof peak in 2011. The question came up again as she moved to Calgary, Canada, and witnessed a similar devastating flood in 2013. Miss Murphy knew that during the Brisbane and Calgary floods, hydrology forecasts had predicted where rivers would peak at certain bridges, but she realised it wasn't enough. If you aren't a hydraulic engineer who is able to translate that flood height into an impact to properties, your personal property, your car, it can be very challenging, she says. Miss Murphy also notes that static flood maps, including those that chart 1 in 100-year floods, are also expensive and can take days or weeks to produce. This makes them more suited to development planning and infrastructure design applications rather than emergency planning and management. "I was thinking there has to be something more." She began dedicating her evenings and weekends to looking for a solution, which eventually led her to co-found FloodMap with web developer Ryan Plosser. With a significant research and development investment, FloodMap was launched in 2018. FloodMap's technology can rapidly forecast water levels to map floods before they happen. It It does this by ingesting huge amounts of historical data, including things like rainfall and ground saturation levels, and uses artificial intelligence to accurately model the way water will behave. The software also uses information about land features and river systems to work out how a flood will affect different areas. The company claims its models can run 100,000 times faster than traditional techniques. An additional benefit is that the resulting models can refresh hourly using real-time rival sensor data and rainfall forecasts. The technology is not available to individuals. Instead, it is being integrated into services offered by government agencies in Australia and the US to better understand floods before, during and after they happen. Researchers at the University of Melbourne's Department of Infrastructure Engineering are taking a similar approach, understanding that speed is key for emergency planning. Like Miss Murphy, flood modeler turned researcher Dr. Wayne Wu is looking at ways to simulate flood levels over time at speed using machine learning techniques. Importantly, this is being done by Dr. Wu says without compromising accuracy and without costing the earth. The availability of accurate real-time data that can be interpreted at a property-specific level is a huge part of the challenge, but being able to disseminate meaningful data to the public is also key. As Dr. Wu says, if people's collective comprehension of flood risk doesn't improve, you will not actually improve the situation. Even the concept of a 1 in 100 year flood is widely misunderstood. It means a flood event has a 1 in 100 chance of happening in any given year, as opposed to there only being one major flood every 100 years. That's where companies like the Australian-based Early Warning Network come in. EWN sends opt-in SMS, text messages, email, landline and app push alerts to residents and businesses in at-risk areas, typically via insurers, councils and other government agencies who signed up to their services. Flood alerts are primarily based on data collected and distributed by Australia's Bureau of Meteorology. However, an operation manager Michael Barth explains EWN has a 24/7 team of human severe weather forecasters, all of whom have an understanding of threats from their experience as storm chasers. This team assess the warnings, eliminate duplication and send geo-targeted alerts using custom-made software. This ensures people receive clear and localized information. If you've ever had automated warnings from weather agencies before, you'll know they can be very repetitive, says Mr. Barth. If you automatically send that to residents, they just get really annoyed with it and tune out. Mr. Barth, Dr. Wu and Miss Murphy all agree that ultimately governments need to adopt these systems and technologies and make planning decisions about whether future development should be permitted on floodplains and whether buyback schemes are warranted in high-risk areas. However, in many cases, moving entire communities or renovating properties at scale using flood-resistant materials is not practical in the immediate future. Given these measures require significant funding and political will, we need something today, right now, because we are living on floodplains, and emergency planning and warnings and alerts fill a critical role to improve safety, save lives and prevent damage, says Miss Murphy. We have to work together to build a safer future. Dozens of people have spent the night away from home, unaware if their flats were destroyed in a fatal gas explosion. One person died and 3 others were injured when 20 flats in Redwood Grove, Bedford, were engulfed in flames in the blast at about 9:30 British Standard Time on Monday. One neighbour said he believed he had lost everything he owned in his flat, which he understood was destroyed. Bedfordshire police said further bodies could be found in the coming days as crews searched the scene. The fire service said an investigation was underway and more details would become known in the coming days. Jas, who lives in a flat in the affected building, said he had been sitting on his sofa when he heard a massive explosion. I thought it was an earthquake, but when I went to have a look at the door, it had come off the hinges and the attic had split in half and the roof had collapsed, he said. People were jumping out the window, someone had collapsed in the hallway, there was dense smoke and fire was everywhere. Jas's daughter Cornelia said his entire flat was gone. Everything he owned was in there, she said. It's his whole life, all his possessions. It's been very traumatic. Lauren Townsend was with her younger daughter at their home in the neighbouring building when the blast happened. The 21-year-old said, I just heard an explosion, the flat shook, and then I heard my neighbours screaming, telling us there was a fire. It seemed like it was in our block, so obviously I panicked and got my little girl out of bed, got the dog out and just started banging on doors trying to get everyone out. Miss Townsend said she had been waiting to speak to the council about where she and her family could stay as they were unable to return home. All my stuff is in there, my little girl's stuff is in there, her nappies, wipes, milk, everything, she said. Obviously you can get that from the shops, but there's all her comforts, toys and clothes. Miss Townsend said the incident was shocking. To think how close to home that was and that this could have been us, it's mad, she said. Another resident who did not want to be named said she had and her husband had been on their way to Wales when they were called about the explosion. The couple said they did not know how badly their home had been affected, but said they were in a better situation than some people. as they had clothes and toiletries with them in a suitcase for their holiday. When I saw the aerial photo, I just burst into tears. I just thought, thank God we weren't in the building. The couple said they were lucky they could stay with family nearby, but hoped they could return at some point to collect sentimental items. Rising food prices mean beef is off the menu in some school dinners, with staples such as potatoes also becoming more expensive. Some caterers have switched to cheaper imported meats and changed the fruit and vegetables on offer. LACA, the School Caterers Association for England and Wales, said the quality of meals was under threat. The government said it was watching the issue of funding for free school meals very closely as costs rise. Until recently, Lyra Green Primary School in Plymouth served local Cornish beef for its roast dinners every Thursday, but has now switched to gammon as a cheaper alternative. Chicken is on the menu less often, replaced instead with cheaper turkey. The school is one of almost 70 around the city, served by the same catering company, which is changing menus because of price rises. Head teacher Bernadette Kennedy said she was pleased the school was still managing to offer a healthy roast meal, but added some children stopped having roast dinner, and when we asked them why, they said they really like the roast beef and Yorkshire puddings. That's sad because with the roast meat comes a lot of offer around vegetables that they might not otherwise try. More than half of the children at the school are entitled to free school meals, and teachers say for some it can only be their only meal of the day. Even the potatoes have become more expensive as their caterer's Cornish supplier has faced rising fertiliser and fuel costs. LACA asked its members about costs and shortages, and more than 160 companies provided information. Between them, they are responsible for the meals of more than 1 million pupils. More than 60 of them said that they had either switched from British meat to meat from abroad or were considering doing so soon. Grocery basics such as pasta, oil, frozen vegetables and fish were among the worst affected in this large snapshot of the impact of rising food prices on school dinners. Caterers reported seeing rises in costs increase between 20 to 30% for many products, with prices often fluctuating weekly. LACA said one catering company had reported the cost of 10 kilograms of pared potatoes rising from £10.46 to £15.50, and boxes of 60 eggs going up from £9.79 to £13.39. The cost of minced beef used to make lasagna or burgers rose by 11% overnight in recent days, it mentioned. Brad Pearce, National Vice Chairman of LACA, said the long-term impact of COVID, the war in Ukraine and rising fuel costs were all having an effect on what his members could put on school plates. Many caterers were also struggling to recruit staff for school kitchens. The costs that are coming forward make it impossible for us to continue unless some very difficult choices are made, said Mr. Pearce. Those included moving to more processed food or buying meat from abroad, he added. That's something that we don't want to do, but in order to keep food on the plate, we have to look at all options. LACA members provide 80% of the school catering service in England and Wales. Assist FM, the body representing Scottish caterers, says its members are expressing similar concerns. The rising costs matter because the budget is limited by what parents are willing to pay and government funding. Schools in England are set the price they charge parents, so the cost of school dinners will vary. Lara Green Primary charges £2.20 per meal, for example. The government pays for free school meals for state school pupils in England from reception to year 2, and for older children from families with low incomes. It costs £2.41 per meal for younger children, about £2.47 for older ones. Child poverty campaigners, as well as school caterers, say costs are rising faster than funding, at a time when, for many families, a hot meal at school has become more important. In Wales, the rising cost of food may have a knock-on effect on the funding needed for ambitious plans to offer a free school meal to every child in primary school. There are mandatory food standards which school meals are meant to meet, and caterers say they're still managing to do that, but it's becoming increasingly difficult, although they are allowed to substitute foods. The government said it would continue to give help to the most vulnerable people in response to rising cost of living, and added that it had expanded across access to free school meals more than any other government in recent decades. Children and Families Minister Will Quince told the PA news agency schools must manage their own individual budgets, but that he would continue to watch funding for free school meals very closely because I've got to ensure that children up and down the country are getting a healthy, nutritious meal at lunchtime. Number 10 did not tell the truth when it said the PM was unaware of official complaints about Chris Pincher's behaviour, a former senior civil servant in the Foreign Office has said. Simon MacDonald said Boris Johnson had been briefed in person about an investigation into Mr. Pincher, then a Foreign Office Minister. The Foreign Secretary at the time and now Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said everything had been done by the book. He told BBC News it was news to me and he did not think it was factually accurate that the PM had been briefed. Mr. Pincher, the MP for Tamworth, was suspended as a Conservative Party MP last week over allegations he groped 2 men at the Carlton Club, a private members club in London. He says he is seeking professional medical support and has denied misconduct. On Monday, Downing Downing Street said Mr. Johnson was not aware of any specific allegations against Mr. Pincher when he appointed him Deputy Chief Whip in February. However, later that day, BBC News revealed that the Prime Minister had been aware of a formal complaint about the MP. Now, in a strongly worded letter to the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, Lord MacDonald has disputed Number 10's version of events. Lord MacDonald, who was the Foreign Office's most senior civil servant from 2015 to 2020, said that in the summer of 2019, a group of officials had complained to me about Mr. Pincher's behaviour. In substance, the allegations were similar to those made about his behaviour at the Carlton Club. He said an investigation upheld the complaint, adding that Mr. Pincher apologised and promised not to repeat the inappropriate behaviour. Mr. Johnson was briefed in person about the initiation and outcome of the investigation, he added. Speaking to BBC Radio 4's Today programme, Mr. Raab said, "I have discussed this with the Prime Minister over the last 24 hours. It is not my understanding that he was directly briefed. In relation to the 2019 allegation or complaint, whilst that was inappropriate behaviour, it didn't trip the wire into disciplinary action," he said. He said he informed the Chief Whip, who at the time was Mark Spencer, about the investigation but not the Prime Minister. Asked if somebody else had told Mr. Johnson, Mr. Raab said that it is news to me, adding that it is not clear to me that was factually accurate. Appearing on the same programme shortly afterwards, Lord MacDonald defended his assertion, saying, "I know that the senior official briefed the Prime Minister in person because that official told me that at the time. Such complaints about ministers are very rare, very sensitive. They are dealt with at the very top level, and so I had the help and support of the Cabinet Office throughout the investigation." He said Downing Street needed to come clean, adding Number 10 have had 5 full days to get the story correct, and that has still not happened. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner said it is now clear that the Prime Minister knew about the seriousness of these complaint but decided to promote this man to a senior position in government anyway. He refused to act and then lied about what he knew. The Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper said Lord MacDonald has shone a new light on this murky cover-up. Boris Johnson needs to own up to his web of lies and finally come clean today. The British Army says it is investigating after its Twitter and YouTube accounts were hacked. Videos on cryptocurrency using images of billionaire businessman Elon Musk appeared on the YouTube channel. The Twitter feed appeared to retweet several posts related to NFTs, a type of electronic artwork for investment. The Army confirmed the breach, saying it took information security extremely seriously and was resolving the issue. Both accounts have now been restored. An Army spokesperson added, "Whilst we have now resolved the issue, an investigation is ongoing and it would be inappropriate to comment further." It's not clear who is behind the hacking incidents, which also saw the accounts renamed. At one stage, the Twitter account name was changed to Bapsclan, accompanied by a profile picture featuring an ape-like cartoon figure with makeup mimicking a clown. By Sunday evening, the account had been restored to normal. The Army later tweeted, "Apology for the temporary interruption to our feed. We will conduct a full investigation and learn from this incident. Thanks for following us, and normal service will now resume." Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood, chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee, said what had happened looked serious. "I hope the results of the investigation and actions taken will be shared appropriately," he added in a tweet. It is not the first time that a high-profile account has been targeted on Twitter. In July 2020, major US accounts were taken over by hackers in an apparent Bitcoin scam. Those accounts affected included Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Kanye West. There is a well-known saying when buying property that the 3 most important things to consider are location, location, location. Well, it now appears that this mantra also applies in the virtual universe that some are hailing as the future of the internet, the so-called Metaverse. Still very much in its infancy, this is the immersive online space where cartoon-like 3D representations of ourselves known as avatars can walk around and talk and interact with others. You typically access it by wearing a set of virtual reality VR goggles connected to your computer. The company formerly known as Facebook is so convinced that the Metaverse is the future of the internet that last year it changed its name to Meta. Meta and its boss Mark Zuckerberg think that eventually many of us will work, play and shop in the Metaverse, or at least our avatars will. While for many people this all sounds fanciful, a growing number of companies are buying up space in the Metaverse so that they can set up shop there. These firms include the likes of Adidas, Burberry, Gucci, Tommy Hilfiger, Nike, Samsung, Louis Vuitton, and even banks HSBC and JP Morgan. The question for such businesses though is, what location do they pick? There are now some 50 or so different providers of worlds within the Metaverse, with the most popular ones including the Sandbox, Decentraland, Voxels, Worlds and Somnium Space, plus Meta's own Horizon Worlds. Retailers and other investors are having to gamble on which of these will go on to become the dominant force in the metaverse, getting the most visits from our avatars, and which other worlds may fade into obscurity. Further within the winning ecosystems, firms have to try to pick what will be the most popular areas. Canadian entrepreneur Andrew Kigale is betting on Decentraland. Last year he spent £2 million worth of cryptocurrency. You have to use a crypto to make a purchase in the metaverse, buying up a chunk of space in Decentraland's dedicated area for fashion retail. Mr. Kigale, who is the boss of cryptocurrency investment website tokens.com, says he has already held a fashion show and plans to rent out his space to fashion firms. The idea for such retailers is that your avatar can pop into a metaverse Photoshop and buy items to be sent to you in the real world. Or alternatively, you can treat your avatar to a new item of computerized clothing. While Mr. Kigale backs Decentraland, he cautions that not all metaverse worlds will succeed. It reminds me of the early days of social media. Similar to social media, the metaverse space will have some large winners and many niche metaverses that succeed, he says. Hong Kong businessman Adrian Cheng has decided to buy in the Sandbox. The boss of the property and retail group K11, he recently purchased an area in that metaverse world for an undisclosed sum. We're invested in a lot of startups and would like to create a pavilion so entrepreneurs can showcase their real-life success stories, he says. Yatsui is co-founder of Hong Kong-based Animoca Brands, the owner of the Sandbox. He says that what makes a metaverse world location powerful is its network effect. By this he means how busy it is and how busy it can become. The value of something increases the more people use it, says Mr. Sui. But how much does it cost to buy an area in the metaverse, and what do you get for that? At the Sandbox, each plot called a land is equivalent to 96 meters by 96 meters long and wide, and with a height of 128 meters, and you can buy just one or many grouped together to form an estate. The prices vary considerably depending on whether or not they are in a popular area. The current average price for one Sandbox land is around $2,300, but late last year someone who was reported to have spent $450,000 for an estimate next to rap star Snoop Dogg's Sandbox mansion. While the size of the plot was not revealed, the cost of each land was said to be significantly inflated. Meanwhile, one report earlier this year said that total retail sales across the metaverse topped 500 million in 2021. Scott Galloway, a professor of marketing at New York University's Leonard N. Stern School of Business, warns that the metaverse is already a bit of a gold rush and there may be financial casualties. What we are seeing now is a speculative bubble around virtual real estate and other metaverse assets. He says when speculative economics emerge in a space, they tend to take it over and drive valuation and interest until the bubble bursts. This caution is echoed by Professor Robert Stone, Chair of Interactive Multimedia Systems at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Firms can really only be confident about the location of their purchase and that location's future value to the activities they intend to pursue and the clients they intend to attract if they perform adequate research in the first place, he says. Buying virtual real estate on spec or based solely on the overhyped marketing ploys of online vendors is a surefire route to disappointment and wasted budgets. There are con artists out there, and as the market is largely deregulated, mistakes can often be costly. Professor Stone also questions how long most people will be prepared to wear VR goggles for. How long will VR tech wearers be able to stay in the metaverse at any one visit? Will the health and safety issues associated with VR wearables, which are unlikely to be solved in the long term, actually damage the metaverse's reputation? Katie Watkin, a director of marketing at Everyrealm, a company that invests in the metaverse, is unsurprisingly far more optimistic. The metaverse is a space where retailers can create experiences and build and be creative, and you don't have the confines of physics, she says. Professor Galloway adds that the winning metaverses will end up packed with much that companies offer us in the real world. They will build entertaining experiences, they will build outrage and division, they will build useful tools, the same things capitalists build in every marketplace. Several Chinese property developers have said they would accept food as payment for homes in recent months as they attempt to attract buyers. The companies advertise deals to let people use produce, including peaches, water, melons, and garlic as down payments on new homes. However, some of these unusual offers have now been reportedly pulled. Home sales in China have fallen for 11 months in a row, while this week a major developer defaulted on its debts. Last week, a property company in the eastern city of Wuxi said it would allow peaches to be used to offset offset as much as 188,888 Chinese yen, which is equivalent to £23,289 in down payments for homes. Another developer in nearby Nanjing said it would accept as much as 5,000 kilograms of watermelon from farmers. It valued the produce at 100,000 Chinese yen, several times what it would cost at local markets. However, the promotion that was meant to run until next Friday has been suspended, the state-run Global Times newspaper has reported. We were told to delete all promotional posters on the social media platforms, the paper quoted a representative of the company as saying, without giving further details. In May, property firm Central China Management ran a 16-day campaign in which it accepted garlic as down payments for homes in China's Xi County, a major garlic producing region. We are helping farmers with love and making it easier for them to buy homes, the firm said in a WeChat post. Under the deal, 1 kati of garlic, which is equivalent to around 600 grams, was valued at 5 Chinese yen, which is around 3 times its market value. The company said it had accepted 860,000 katis of garlic in deals involving 30 homes. However, it has since removed an advert for a similar deal involving wheat, which was launched on WeChat last month. The company did not immediately respond to a BBC request for comment. Experts have said the deals are a way for developers to get around local authority rules that limit the size of discounts they are allowed to offer. Official figures for May show that sales of residential properties in China fell by 41.7% from a year earlier, the 11th consecutive month of declines. On Sunday, major Chinese developer Shimao Group said it had missed interest and principal payments on £825 million of offshore bonds due to that same day. In a filing to the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong, the company said it had seen a noticeable decline in sale with significant changes to the macro environment of the property sector in China since the second half of 2021 and the impact of COVID-19. Meanwhile, embattled Chinese real estate giant Evergrande is in the process of restructuring its business after defaulting on its debts late last year. Some cinemas have banned young people wearing suits from screenings of Minions: The Rise of Gru over rowdy behaviour fueled by a TikTok trend. Teenagers following the hashtag #GentleMinions trend has been accused of making noise and throwing things during the screenings. A staff member at one venue told the BBC they wanted to ensure the experience was not spoiled for younger children on their first cinema trip. Some cinemas said they had to give huge numbers of refunds. Videos showing young people dressing up in suits to watch the movie in large groups and cheering loudly during the screening have gone viral on TikTok, racking up millions of views in some cases. The teenagers filmed themselves copying the characteristics steepled fingers of the movie's supervillain Felonious Gru and celebrated that the 5-year wait is over, referring to the time since the franchise's last installment, Despicable Me 3. Movie studio Universal Pictures endorsed the trend, saying on Twitter to everyone showing up to @Minions in suits, "We see you and we love you." But cinemas have been less appreciative, with several complaining about the behaviour of the young fans drawn to the movie by TikTok. Guernsey's only cinema had to cancel further screenings of the movie, blaming stunningly bad behaviour, including vandalism, throwing objects and abusing staff. Mallard cinema manager Daniel Phillips Smith said it's been absolutely heartbreaking. We've had families who won't even go back into the screen when we've tried to sort it out, families leaving before the film has even started, and of course the children have been in tears. The cinema had suffered a massive financial impact from all the refunds for customers whose viewing of the film had been disturbed, he said. The Regal Cinema in Wadebridge, Cornwall posted a notice saying it would no longer admit unaccompanied children wearing suits for screenings of the movie. Box office staff told the BBC young people in suits have been cheering, clapping, whooping and rising to their feet throughout the film. "We were trying to talk to people on the way in after a while, but that wasn't really working, so we had to just decide to put a stop to it and say thanks very much, but we're not doing the whole TikTok trend thing," a staff member said. "We had people coming in with children for their very first cinema trip and we wanted to protect that." Images on social media showed several Odeon cinemas displaying signs warning customers due to recent disturbances following the #GentleMinions trend. Any group of guests in formal attire will be refused entry for shows of Minions: The Rise of Gru. That some cinema goers praised the behaviour of the #GentleMinions at their screenings. Stacey Woods, a teaching assistant from Surrey, said on social media that a group in suits when she saw the film was so much fun and so well behaved, adding they politely stopped bowing down and worshipping a giant poster of Gru so her children could pose for a photo with it. One parent told the Mansfield Chad the ban on young people in suits had extended to 2 boys in his 13-year-old son's group who were merely wearing white shirts with collars. They were reportedly be turned away from their pre-booked screening until parents could drive down with a couple of jumpers to cover the offending items of smart clothing. A spokesperson for the Odeon said due to a small number of incidents in our cinemas over the weekend, we've had to restrict access in some circumstances. The View Cinema chain said it was still welcoming all customers to see the film, which had been incredibly popular over the opening weekend. The Minions movie franchise, which began with 2010's Despicable Me, follows reformed supervillain Gru and his army of small yellow henchmen who quickly became the subject of endless online memes. The latest film tells Gru's origin story as an 11-year-old struggling to break into the supervillain business. Sainsburys customers are switching to own brand products and cutting back on non-essential spending as prices rise more quickly, the supermarket's boss has said. Simon Roberts added that pressure on household budgets is set to increase over the rest of the year. Households have been struggling with the cost of living as energy, food and fuel bills soar. Mr. Roberts said Sainsburys was doing everything we can to keep prices low. Some customers are switching into economy own label when food shopping, while Sainsburys is seeing customers pulling back some spending on general merchandise, Mr. Roberts has mentioned, with larger big ticket items more challenged. Sainsburys sales fell 4% in the 16 weeks to the 25th of June compared with last year, but that difference was mainly down to how lockdowns in 2021 had pushed up sales, he mentioned. Sales at Argos were also down in part due to the squeeze on household budgets, Chief Financial Officer Kevin O'Byrne said. Last month, a BBC commissioned survey suggested that people were cutting back on food, fuel and clothes as prices rise. Announcing Sainsbury's latest trading update, Mr. Roberts said, "We really understand how hard it is for millions of households right now, and that's why we are investing £500 million and doing everything we can to keep our prices low, especially on the products customers buy most often. The pressure on household budgets will only intensify over the remainder of the year, and I'm very clear that doing the right thing for our customers and colleagues will remain at the very top of our agenda." Sainsbury's suppliers are also under pressure as commodities such as fuel and fertilizer prices rise in part due to the war in Ukraine. The supermarket chain was working very closely with suppliers focused on how we navigate these price rises. He said it was a matter of balancing keeping prices low for customers but also keeping products in stock. The supermarket has also been under pressure from campaign group Share Action, overpaying the living wage of £9.90 per hour not only to its own staff but also to contractors such as cleaners and security guards. Mr. Roberts said Sainsbury's pays colleagues as fully as we can. The cost of living is rising at its highest rate for 40 years and the Bank of England has warned prices could rise faster within months. Despite its latest comments, Sainsbury's said it's still expecting full-year underlying profits before tax be in line to its previous estimate of between £630 million and £690 million. Last month, research firm Kantar said the average annual grocery bill was set to climb by £380 this year. The researchers also found shoppers are switching from branded items to supermarkets' own label products. To try to ease the burden on households, retailers and other businesses have been under pressure from the government prices, but small firms have said the plans are a slap in the face, saying they had already cut all expenses, even necessary ones, to the bone. Logistics firm DHL has announced plans for the expansion and creation of depots across the UK. The firm said it was going to invest £190 million into creating 10 new collection and delivery depots across the UK and expanding 20 sites, creating 3,500 jobs. Half of the money will be used on the new hub, South Coventry Airport. Its chief financial officer said the investment would help the company take advantage of future market growth. Once built, the SEGRO Park Coventry Gateway will hold up to 500,000 items per day, and more than 600 new jobs in administration and manufacturing are expected to be created. The German firm said the investment formed part of £482 million plans to expand its UK e-commerce operation, DHL Parcel UK. It comes after the company has seen a 40% rise in volume since the start of 2020, following a boom in its e-commerce division. Peter Fuller, Chief Financial Officer of DHL Parcel UK, said this investment is a real demonstration of the excellent work our people and partners have delivered over the past 2 years to get us to the level of growth where major expansion is required to meet customer demand. E-commerce is going to continue to shape the world around us. Easyjet's Chief Operating Officer has resigned after a series of flight cancellations and disruptions at the airline in recent weeks. The airline said Peter Bellew had left to pursue other business opportunities and wished him well. It comes after thousands of Easyjet flights have been cancelled, some at short notice. Trade union Unite last month criticised a lack of leadership at the airline and urged Mr. Bellew to take control. Announcing Mr. Bellew's resignation, Easyjet Chief Executive Johan Lundgren said the airline was absolutely focused on delivering a safe and reliable operation this summer. He said the role of Interim Chief Operations Officer would be in the very capable hands of David Morgan, who will provide strong leadership for the airline this summer. Mr. Morgan has been with Easyjet since 2016 and is currently Director of Flight Operations. He had previously led overall operations at the airline as Interim Chief Operating Officer in 2019. The aviation sector shed thousands of jobs during the pandemic but is now struggling to meet the rebound in demand for travel. Easyjet has been one of the worst hit for cancellations in recent months. It has axed thousands of flights, including many of them the day they were due to depart. Late last month, it said it would be making some cancellations over the summer to build in some more resilience and in response to caps imposed by London Gatwick and Amsterdam Schiphol airports. It said this gave customers advance notice and potential to rebook. While it will still have made use of the government's landing stock amnesty as part of this plan, Easyjet said it would not be announcing any further cancellations this week. It said the last affected customers would be told on Monday. In optimistic quotes in EasyJet's late January trading update, its boss Johan Lundgren predicted a strong summer ahead with demand pushing capacity near to 2019 levels. 6 months later, with COVID restrictions largely behind them, people want to go on holiday again. Demand doesn't appear to have been a problem, but ambitions have evidently had to be scaled back. Thousands of flights have had to be cancelled. Today, the airline's boss says a safe and reliable operation is the absolute focus. EasyJet is far from the only business affected by widespread issues hitting aviation at the moment, from staff shortages to industrial action. It hopes not to have any further waves of cancellations and points out it's still running up to 1,700 flights each day. However, it has undeniably been through a challenging time of late and must be hoping that a change at the top can herald a change in performance. It is understood just over 150,000 of the 160,000 EasyJet flights initially scheduled to run over July, August and September will go ahead. This means roughly 10,000 have been cancelled, or around 6%. The airline said the majority of its flights were unaffected by the cancellations, with it continuing to operate up to 1,700 flights a day. However, unions representing EasyJet cabin crew in Spain have called a series of 24-hour strikes for July in a dispute over pay. The first of the strikes took place over the weekend and a further 6 days of action are due later this month. Shares in EasyJet, which have fallen back to the lows of March 2020 at the start of the pandemic, were trading down almost 3% after news of Mr. Belu's departure, making it one of the biggest fallers of the FTSE 250 index. More cancellations from the raft airlines are expected this week, as the government has given carriers until Friday to announce changes to their schedules without facing a penalty notice. The move is an attempt to minimise disruption during the peak summer holiday season. Finnish researchers have installed the world's first fully working sand battery, which can store green power for months at a time. The developers say this could solve the problem of year-round supply, a major issue for green energy. Using low-grade sand, the device is charged up with heat made from cheap electricity from solar or wind. The sand stores the heat at around 500 Celsius, which can then warm homes in winter when energy is most expensive. Finland gets most of its gas currently from Russia, so the war in Ukraine has drawn the issue of green power into sharp focus. It has the longest Russian border in the EU, and Moscow has now halted gas and electricity supplies in the wake of Finland's decision to join NATO. Concerns over sources of heat and light, especially with the long-haul Finnish winter on the horizon, are preoccupying politicians and citizens alike. But in a corner of a small power plant in western Finland strands a new piece of technology that has the potential to ease some of these worries. The key element in this device are around 100 tons of builder's sand held high inside a dull grey silo. These rough and ready grains may well represent a simple, cost-effective way of storing power for when it's needed the most. Because of climate change and now thanks to the rapidly rising price of fossil fuels, there's a surge of investment in new renewable energy production. But while new solar panels and wind turbines can be quickly added to national grids, these extra sources also present huge challenges. The toughest question is about intermittency. How do you keep the lights on when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? Adding more renewables to the electricity grid also means you need to boost other energy sources to balance the network, as too much or too little power can cause it to collapse. The most obvious answer to these problems is large-scale batteries, which can store and balance energy demands as the grid becomes greener. Right now, most batteries are made within lithium and are expensive, with a large physical footprint, and can only cope with a limited amount of excess power. But in the town of Kankanpää, a team of young Finnish engineers have completed the first commercial installation of a battery made from sand that they believe can solve the storage problem in a low-cost, low-impact way. Whenever there's like this high surge of available green electricity, we want to be able to get it into the storage really quickly, said Marko Julen, one of the two founders of Polar Night Energy, who have developed the product. The device has been installed in the Vatajankoski power plant, which runs the district heating system for the area. Low-cost electricity warms the sand up to 500 Celsius by resistive heating, same process that makes electric fires work. This generates hot air which is circulated in the sand by means of a heat exchanger. Sand is a very effective medium for storing heat and loses little over time. The developer says that the device could keep sand at 500 Celsius for several months. So when energy prices are higher, the battery discharges the hot air, which warms water for the district heating system, which is then pumped around homes, offices, and even local swimming pool. The idea for the sand battery was first developed at a former pulp mill in the city of Tampere, with the council donating the workspace and providing funding to get it off the ground. If we have some power stations that are just working for a few hours in the winter time, when it's the coldest, it's going to be extremely expensive, said Elena Stepanin, an energy and climate specialist for the city. But if we have this sort of solution that provides flexibility for the use and storage of heat, that would help a lot in terms of expense, I think. One of the big challenges now is whether the technology can be scaled up to really make a difference, and will the developers be able to use it to get to electricity out as well as heat. The efficiency falls dramatically when the sand is used to just return power to the electricity grid, but storing green energy as heat for the longer term is also a huge opportunity for industry, where most of the processed heat that's used in food and drink, textiles or pharmaceuticals comes from the burning of fossil fuels. Other research groups such as the US National Renewable Energy Laboratory are actively looking at sand as a viable form of battery for green power, but the Finns are the first with a working commercial system that so far is performing well, according to the man who's invested in the system. It's really simple, but we like the idea of trying something new. To be the first in the world to do something like this, said Pekka Pasi, the managing director of the Vata Janskoski power plant. It's a bit crazy if you wish, but I think it's going to be a success. A combination of rising costs and falling donations is hitting the incomes of UK hospices, a provider has told the BBC. Havens Hospices in Essex said it was making it harder to meet rising demand at its sites in Southend and Benfleet. The average value of one-off donations to the charity has halved since April, and its energy, food and staffing costs are soaring, said boss Steve Smith. About 80% of Havens' income comes from donations, he added. That's from people jumping up aeroplanes, running marathons, holding cake sales, and all sorts of other activities. But we're losing supporters at the moment. People are giving less and can't afford to give regular payments. Mr. Smith said the charity expects its energy bills alone to soar by 85% in the next 12 months, from $40,500 to around $75,000. On top of that, matching NHS rates of pay to recruit and retain staff has pushed up its wage bill by 37%, an additional £2.8 million a year. Charity has also seen the cost of food go up, as well as fuel for the vehicles its community teams use. Havens is not the only hospice facing financial uncertainty. The Charity Hospice UK estimates the hospices across the country will face up to £100 million of additional costs this year due to rising inflation and the cost of matching NHS pay. That works out to an extra £500,000 a year for an average hospice. As well as looking at other ways to raise money, Mr. Smith said Havens was trying to make savings where it could. We've been looking at getting food supplied to us by donations. We use motion sensors to make sure lights aren't left on, and we're looking at whether we can move to electric vehicles to reduce our fuel costs. Havens Hospices needs to raise around £85,000 a week to provide all their services, which are free to those who use them. As well as inpatient care, they offer counselling, creative workshops and complementary therapies like massage and Reiki. Amanda Jane Fremantle, who has a congenital health condition, has been going to Fair Havens in Southend for around a year. The complementary therapies relax me, she told the BBC. I can bring a family member or friend and they can relax with me as well. It gives me a purpose to go out, she added. I meet people who have an illness like myself. We are able to chat and have fun. And I learn new skills, which is amazing. Without the funding, I wouldn't be able to do all that. Amanda Jane is supporting the hospice too by making Pampers packages for the inpatients. Elsewhere, the hospice's staff are helping lead the fundraising efforts. Ward manager Pamela Houghton Clark's plans to run the London Marathon next year alongside 2 colleagues. It's going to be a challenge, none of us are runners, she said, but she and the team are very aware of the hospice's challenges and are keen to do their bit. It's clear that the cost pressures hitting households across the UK could affect how vital hospice services are funded. Mr. Smith says Havens is thinking about different ways of fundraising and diversifying our income, a process that's already underway as it looks ahead to the next couple of years. But he acknowledges there could be tough decisions to make. The risk is we will need to consider what we are offering and what is the most effective use of the income we receive. We will have to prioritise those services, essentially for those who need them the most. A firm owned by Asia's richest person has struck a deal to open outlets of the British coffee and sandwich chain Pret Manger across India. A unit of multi-billionaire Mukesh Ambani's Reliance Industries will run the chain under a franchise agreement. It marks the first venture by Reliance Brands, which also owns India's biggest retail chain into the country's growing food and drinks industry. The first outlet is expected to open early next year in Mumbai. Our partnership with Pret is rooted in the strong growth potential of both Pret as a brand, also of the food and beverage industry in India, Darshan Mehta, the managing director of Reliance Brands, said in a statement. We're looking forward to working with them on what is our most ambitious global franchise partnership to date. Pret a Manger's chief executive Pano Christo added. Pret a Manger, which means ready to eat in French, was founded in London in 1983, with the first shop opening the following year. After the original company went into liquidation, the brand was bought by college friends Sinclair Beecham and Julian Metcalf, with their first store opening in 1986. The brand currently has 550 outlets around the world, across 9 markets including the UK, US, Europe and Asia. Last year, Reliance Industries announced a franchise agreement with the US-based convenience store chain 7-Eleven. The deal helped cement the company's position as India's largest bricks and mortar retailer. So who is Mukesh Ambani? Mr. Ambani has a personal fortune of around £78.2 billion, according to Forbes magazine. The 65-year-old's late father, Dhirubhai Ambani, founded a textile manufacturer that would eventually become Reliance Industries. It is now one of India's largest conglomerates, with businesses including petrochemicals, oil and gas, telecoms and retail. Mr. Ambani is the chairman of Reliance Industries. The Ambani family has a 49% stake of the company. The family also owns assets in the UK worth tens of millions of pounds. And in 2019, Reliance Brands Limited, which is owned by Mr. Ambani, bought the toy retailer Hamleys for an undisclosed sum. Last year, Reliance Industries bought the historic British country club Stoke Park for £57 million. Some families in Northern Ireland are on the edge of placing their children into care due to lack of respite services, a children's rights lawyer has said. Respite care is provided by the Health Trust for the parents of children with additional needs. It allows parents or carers to take a break from caring and have their children looked after overnight. Short-term services have been reduced, the Trust have confirmed. This is because facilities are being repurposed to provide emergency care to children who cannot live at home or cannot be cared for in the family type arrangement. Staffing and recruitment is also an issue. None of the trusts have returned to pre-pandemic levels of service. Rasheen and Brendan Mackin's 12-year-old daughter, Maisie, is autistic and has a learning disability. At school, Maisie has 2 care assistants to help look after her during the day. At her home in Berwick, County Tyrone, it is Maisie's parents who take care of her. In the summer months, it is a 24-hour-a-day job, 7 days a week. Maisie has never received any respite care from the Western Trust, according to her mother. She doesn't sleep, she's awake all through the summer holidays, says Mrs. McCain. She does try to climb out of the windows, she'll flood the bathroom, she'll run a bath, she'll try to turn on the cooker. It's 24/7. She said she was burnt out due to the lack of sleep. She said the situation was taking a toll on her other 3 daughters. I feel like I neglect the other 3 children. They don't get the attention they deserve. They all have needs in their own right, but I feel I can't do anything for them. I am so focused on Maisie. The Western Trust acknowledged that its respite services were under intense pressure. This is largely due to the need to provide medium to long-term residential care for a number of children whose placements have been broken down, it said. The Trust very much recognises the stress and strain the current situation places on families and is committed to resolving this issue at the earliest opportunity. Eamon McNally, a mental health solicitor at the Children's Law Centre, said families were on their knees because of the lack of respite services. Families don't have respite, they don't have other services available to them, they don't have help with the community, they are relying on friends and families. Parents love their children, they want their children at home with them, but some young people are on the edge of care. Sherelle Stewart, National Autistic Society Northern Ireland Director, said the lack of respite care meant an increase in the number of families who could not cope. Ms. Stewart said that when a facility is repurposed to accommodate a young person in need of longer term care, that facility becomes a home for that individual. It means it is then closed to respite for anyone other than that individual. When respite services are unavailable, the Trust can give direct payments to families to arrange their own carers. Mr. McNally said families were unable to get the staff to look after their children. If they do, they could not retain them, he added. While on paper it might look like there is a resource there for the family, the reality is they cannot get the help using the direct payments. Ms. Mackin said she needed 2 people to work with Maisie and that recruitment was near impossible. She said nobody wants to work with Maisie. Any agency staff that come out never come back, she said. Maisie is just too challenging. In terms of the various trusts that were mentioned, the Western Trust has 2 facilities that provide respite care for children called Avalon House and Rosebud Cottage. Both are currently closed. The South Eastern Trust has half the number of beds it had available for respite prior to the pandemic. One of its 2 facilities have been repurposed to provide longer term care. The Northern Trust Whitehaven facility has been closed for respite for the month of June due to a young person being admitted for an emergency placement. In the Belfast Trust, one of the 2 facilities being used for Respite is closed for refurbishment, and the Southern Trust said it had not returned to pre-pandemic levels of Respite availability. 6 in 10 consumers say low prices will become more influential when choosing where to shop and what to buy in the next 2 years, a survey has suggested. But businesses need to offer more than just discounts to customers, according to the Institute of Customer Service. The organisation, which surveyed 10,000 people, said firms should offer value and a choice of ways to pay. About a third of those asked were still prepared to pay more to guarantee good service. Joe Corson, the Institute's chief executive, said customers did not want products and services that were just cheap, so businesses need to be flexible and transparent about what they were offering their customers. That could include being upfront about products and when they were available if the supply was held up. Staff needed to be understanding of the financial pressures their customers faced and offer a range of payment options, she said, and they should also consider giving advice on budgeting or getting the most value out of products. Firms should also gauge whether technology was the best solution to problems and when a discussion with a real person was required. The Institute questioned consumers as part of a regular review of customer service at a time when prices are rising at their fastest rate 40 years and the costs of energy, fuel and food continue to climb. A shortage of skills and staff, problems with supplies from around the world and the economic environment were all putting pressure on businesses to deliver a consistent service for customers, the Institute has mentioned. Organisations cannot avoid these issues. They will need to develop service strategies that are responsive to evolving customers' needs, but also protect short and long-term business performance, Ms. Corson has said. More than 17% of those surveyed were experiencing a product or service problem, the highest overall level since records began in 2008. The quality and reliability of goods and services in particular was a growing problem, the survey suggested. The cost of dealing with poor service added to ongoing expenses of businesses. The Institute estimated the collective cost to be £9.24 billion a month in staff hours. Ms. Corson said UK firms had got much better at dealing with and resolving complaints, but more work was required to prevent the problems in the first place. A year ago, the Institute warned that customers were fed up of companies using COVID as an excuse for long waits on the telephone or late deliveries, but that issue has now been clearly overtaken by the issues relating to the cost of living. However, the Institute has also stressed that the problems were not all one way. Some consumers have been violent and abusive towards staff in shops. Recent data revealed 44% of frontline service staff had experienced hostility from customers in the past 6 months, a rise from 35% during the previous 6 months. A quarter of staff who have faced increased hostility said they believed the increase was partly down to the sharp rise in the cost of living and the stress this has placed on customers. The survey follows a critical report from Citizens Advice on customer service performance from energy firms. On Friday, the charity, which ranked suppliers using a star rating system, said that standards had plummeted to a record low since June 2021, when several suppliers went bust due to high global gas prices. The average waiting time on the phone to speak to a firm was now about 6.5 minutes, compared with just under 4 minutes the year before, it said. It added that standards risked falling further at the same time as prices would rise this winter. This month, the Financial Ombudsman Service, an independent arbiter of unresolved disputes, also told financial firms to deal with problems quicker, especially for victims of fraud and scams. Drones are to be used to courier drugs in a bid to speed up the delivery of vital medicine, the NHS has announced. Chemotherapy drugs will be flown from Portsmouth to a hospital on the Isle of Wight as part of a pilot scheme, with the first flight later on Monday. NHS England said it was hoped that the technology would lead to same-day delivery of orders across the country. Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard said the scheme, which will also be trialled in Northumbria, was extraordinary. If successful, it's believed the Trust will be able to be the first to deliver chemotherapy drugs by drone. Announcing it ahead of the 74th anniversary of the founding of the NHS, she said it was clear that the pace of change and improvement across the health service is only accelerating. Delivering chemo by drone is another extraordinary development for cancer patients and shows how the NHS will stop at nothing to ensure people get the treatment they need as promptly as possible, whilst also cutting costs. The scheme will cut delivery times to Ireland from 4 hours to 30 minutes, with one flight replacing 2 car journeys and 1 hovercraft or ferry journey per delivery. The drugs will be flown directly from the pharmacy at Portsmouth Hospitals University NHS Trust to St Mary's Hospital, where staff will collect them before distributing it to hospital teams and patients. An NHS England spokesman said chemotherapy drugs were difficult to transport, as some doses have a short shelf life. He added that it was hoped the new delivery method, which has been created in partnership with tech company Appian, would offer a better option for cancer patients living on the Isle of Wight, many of whom currently have to travel to the mainland for treatment. Health Secretary Sajid Javid said he wanted England to become a world leader in cancer care, and using the drones would mean patients will have quicker, fairer access to treatment no matter where they live. A trial of the drone program in Northumbria is expected to follow the initial Isle of Wight trial. How would you feel if your child, or one you knew, was taken into care and ended up living in a B&B, a hostel, or even slept rough? What I'm talking about here is the care system, the safety net we'd rely on if we couldn't look after our kids. I've been working on a BBC documentary which has found teenagers are still being placed in B&Bs and hostels 6 years after the Welsh Government said it wanted to eliminate it. Some of the stories have shocked me. This is in relation to an interview with actor Michael Sheen. With record numbers of children being taken into care in Wales and England, they've spoken to some young people who have been through the care system in an hour-long documentary. Filmed over nearly 3 years, it's helped by support from the BBC. Their question is, does the care system always care for children who can't stay with mum and dad? I know for a fact prison would have been better than where I was placed, Niall told BBC Wales investigates lifting the lid on the care system. He says he grew up moving in and out of care between the ages of 14 and 18, and after a place in a children's home broke down just as he turned 17, he was placed in a B&B. People moved there that had just come out of prison and stuff, Niall added, so I got robbed a couple of times in there. You'd see people kicking down doors on a daily basis. There'd be people smashing windows, people carrying knives. Niall told me he was then moved into what he describes as a hostel, although his council insist it was supported housing as they tried to find him somewhere permanent to live. I was woken up by a punch basically, he recalled about one incident, so I had to start barricading my door, which obviously they got through eventually. It was like they put all the troubled teenagers under one roof. The people in charge of Niall's care said they had made every effort to find him somewhere else to stay, and that his case was not straightforward, but Caerphilly Council did not comment on the threats and the violence. Hope was taken into care at 14, but ran away after her foster placement broke down when she was 16. I was a child in a tent with an adult who was over the age of 18, sleeping rough where nobody knew where I was. Hope, now in her early 20s, told me, I was technically a child of the state, it wasn't okay, I was at risk. Those responsible for Hope's care said it could not comment on individual cases, but Wrexham Council said its services had been transformed and it would use Hope's comments to improve things further. In 2016, they presented a petition to the Welsh Government to end the practice of children being placed in B&Bs and hostels. Ministers said they wanted to eliminate it, but 6 years on, it's still happening. Research by the BBC Wales Investigates team suggests dozens of teenagers like Niall and Hope are still being put in that position. Freedom of Information requests to all councils in Wales showed at least 50 young people were placed in B&Bs, hostels and budget hotels in the past financial year, with at least 285 in other accommodation, which is not regulated by the care watchdog. I don't want this to come across as an attack on social workers, because it's not. It is their job to look after these young people, but they're working within a system that is, according to one report last year by those in charge of social services, facing a crisis to find suitable places for children to stay. While most children placed in such temporary accommodation are 16 or 17, our investigation found a small number even younger. One example included an 11-year-old boy being housed in temporary accommodation with council staff because there was nowhere else for them to go. Pret says it has returned to profit after a few tough years, as it shifts its focus away from London towards regional towns and suburbs. Sales at the sandwich chain rose to £357.8 million in the 6 months to June, up 230% on last year, when lockdowns hammered the business. About a third of Pret's UK shops are now outside London, including new sites in Brentwood, Harrogate and York. These stores account for most of its recent growth, the chain said. Like all hospitality businesses, Pret had to close its sites for long spells during the pandemic and move to a takeaway model. But the chain said it returned to profit in March after posting bruising losses of £225.9 million and £343 million in 2021 and 2020. Since September last year, the firm has opened 27 new shops across the country, mainly outside of central London, taking its UK portfolio to 442 shops. The chain, which was founded in London in 1986, said 36% of its UK shops were now located in regional cities and towns. Pret also said it had expanded overseas, where it had 558 shops, striking new franchise deals in India, Spain, Portugal and Canada. The chain has tried to innovate since the pandemic hit, launching a drink subscription service, which initially sparked thousands of customer complaints over the limited availability of some beverages. But Pret said the service, which allows customers to have up to 5 hot drinks every day, was now used over 1 million times a week, up from 667,000 times a week last year. The service has boosted customer loyalty, it added, with subscribers typically spending 4 times as much with Pret than non-subscribers. Prices in Turkey are rising at their fastest rate in 24 years, according to the latest official figures. The annual rate of inflation, at the pace at which prices rise, hit 78.62% in June, which was slightly higher than expectations. Transport costs and housing saw some of the sharpest price rises, worsened by the Ukraine war. Inflation has surged since last year, when the Turkish president cut interest rates to try to boost the economy. Usually countries would increase interest rates in an attempt to cool inflation, but President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has described interest rates as the mother and father of all evil, and has used more unorthodox policy to try to dampen prices, including intervening in foreign exchange markets. Last year's cut in interest rates from 90% to 14% has led to a fall in the value of the Turkish lira, which means it costs more for the country to import goods from abroad. In the latest inflation figures, transportation saw the biggest rise in costs, climbing 123% over the past year. Food and non-alcoholic beverages were close behind, with price rises of 94%, while the cost of furnishings and household equipment was up 81%. The overall inflation figure was the highest since September 1998, when annual inflation hit 80.4%, and Turkey was battling to end a decade of chronically high inflation. As inflation in Turkey continues to smolder, the nation's economy is also contending with the effects of a plunging currency value. The Turkish lira has shed nearly half its value in the past year. That means consumer spending power is in decline as the cost of goods and services continue to skyrocket. Despite reaching a 24-year high in June, economists had expected the inflation rate to rise even further. This is the second month in a row official data has missed forecasts, and that is continuing to stoke concern about the reliability of official data from Turkey's statistics agency. Helping to fan those flames ahead of the release of May's inflation data, the head of the price statistics department resigned, citing health reasons. Whilst times are tough for people living and working in Turkey, favourable exchange rates are helping lure international travellers to the country for summer holidays. But Turkish holidaymakers are coming in fewer numbers than in the past, and to afford it, they're staying fewer days and paying off the cost of travel over 10 to 12 months. The surge in prices is making it tough for businesses. I've never experienced a season like this before, said hotelier Volkan Euromels, the general manager of Kemer Holiday Club in Antalya. I can't budget my spending because the costs change from day to day. The all-inclusive concept is no longer sustainable. Over 50% of our guests come from Russia or Ukraine, so without them, the beginning of the season was a little problematic. Turkish people are trying to come on holiday. They use credit cards or pay in installments, or are shortening their planned holidays to make it affordable for them. There is still a societal stigma stopping some young people taking vocational qualifications instead of a university degree. That is one of the key findings of research commissioned by the Department for the Economy. It suggested that for some, there was a culturally perpetuated stigma of failing to get into university. That meant study in a further education college was often seen as a plan B compared to going to university. The just published research was into perceptions of level 4 and level 5 qualifications in Northern Ireland. Level 4 and 5 qualifications sit in between A levels and an undergraduate degree. These are basically the first and second years of your university education. If you are at a level 6 qualification, that would be you finishing your undergraduate degree. They include things like apprenticeships, higher national diplomas, HNDs, professional qualifications, and national vocational qualifications. Many are taught in FE colleges, although some are taught in universities. A record portion of school leavers in Northern Ireland have entered university during the past 2 years, but there has also been a significant fall in the number of school leavers entering a further education colleges. A recent installment strategy for 14 to 19-year-olds in education called for more parity of esteem between academic and more technical or vocational qualifications for young people. But the new research found that some sixth form pupils did not value vocational qualifications as much as university education. The report said that there was still a widespread preference for university-based study and an enduring stigma surrounding vocational education and training more generally. This less favourable comparison and inevitable societal stigma appears to be reinforced both at school by peers and teachers and at home by family or parents. A number of comments made by contributors to the research reflects this. When you mention the word apprentice or anything other than an A-level or university to a parent, you just see their face saying you think their child is a failure, one teacher said. Too many people in Northern Ireland still believe only the A-levels to degrees route is acceptable, which is a very 20th century view and totally fails to take account of the changes and changing environment in the 21st century. An agri-food employer, meanwhile, said that there was still an academic snobbery among some in his business about vocational qualifications. Several interview participants spoke of the need to shift attitudes to market the positive outcomes from vocational qualifications and to promote the value of alternative routes from school to employment, the report mentioned. The research also found that school careers advice to pupils about taking vocational or technical qualifications was inconsistent. At its worst, there was a perception among some participants that certain schools actively discourage or even block FE colleges from coming in to speak to their pupils, which perpetuates the sense of otherness associated with vocational qualifications, the report has mentioned. As a result, there is for many poor understanding and awareness of level 4 and level 5 qualifications. School pupils from both grammar and non-grammar schools noted a strong university bias in their career planning sessions. The report therefore recommended more consistent careers information in schools about level 4 and level 5 vocational qualifications. More positively, it suggested that many students who took vocational qualifications valued the fact they combined practical experience, work and learning. Some employers also said that students who had taken those qualifications were more ready to get their sleeves rolled up and work harder than some graduates. Reports said there was a need, however, for a website which contained information on and allowed students to apply for all vocational courses in the same way that pupils applied for university through UCAS. The Department for the Economy report was based on the views of almost 600 sixth form leavers, students in further education colleges, parents and teachers, as well as smaller numbers of focus group interviews. The research was carried out and the report written by academics from the Centre for Research in Educational Underachievement at Argentinas University College, Belfast, from January to May 2022. From my perspective, I can kind of understand the point that this report is showing. My school was very much one that pushed you towards the university bias. If you weren't going to university, you were considered a failure, and pretty much any type of support would only go towards those people. I remember as a school leaver just being screamed at and shouted at and berated because you weren't going to university and what you were going to do with the rest of your life. I had people saying to me, oh, you're only going to be stuck on benefits, and these were just classified as passing comments. These were on a near daily basis and it really dragged me down. A few years later on, I did actually get my degree. I've just finished my original degree and I'm in the process of completing my master's degree. From this, I am looking at going to the Cordon Bleu School of Cooking to get the Grand Diploma. That's the highest level education in the culinary fields, so I have a more rounded education throughout all aspects of the food industry. Hopefully through processing that, I can then be in the fast moving consumer goods industry, which is looking at supply chain sides, developing contracts, understanding contract law, and being able to work as some type of operations manager. That's the general direction that I want to go in, but I know if I'd gone down the educational route, I might have been able to get through things a lot faster. Instead, by going through this way, it's taken me a lot further and a lot more away from what I've wanted to do, having to take almost some of the worst and lowest positions just in order to, survive and make some kind of a living for myself. The smell hits you first. Freshly cooked rice, lentils and spinach served in ladles from steaming pots. Dozens of families, including mothers with babies, are lined up with plates to get a serving of what will likely be their only meal for the day. We're here because we are hungry, says Chandrika Manel, a mother of 4. As she kneads a bowl of rice with her hands, mixing it with lentils and spinach before feeding it to one of her children, she explains that even buying bread is a struggle. There are times I give them milk and rice, but we don't cook any vegetables, they're too expensive. Depleted foreign reserves and soaring inflation have devastated Sri Lanka's economy in recent months. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who pushed through tax cuts that shrunk the state's coffers and borrowed heavily from China to fund ambitious infrastructure projects, has been blamed for the crisis. The pandemic, which hit tourism, and the war in Ukraine, which sent oil prices rocketing, has only made the situation worse. But now Sri Lanka is on the brink of a humanitarian crisis, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has told the BBC. The organisation found that 70% of the country's families have cut down on food since the start of the year, and stocks of fuel and essential medicines are also running out fast. That is Miss Manel's first visit to a community kitchen, as she found her options disappearing. The cost of living is so high, we are taking loans to survive. The kitchen is a month old. Moses Akash started it in a church hall in Colombo after meeting a single mother who lived off a jackfruit for 3 days. We get people who haven't had a second plate of rice for the last 4 months, Pastor Moses says. By his estimates, the number of people queuing up for food has grown from 50 to well over 250 a day. It's not surprising given that food prices in Sri Lanka went up by 80% in June alone. I see a lot of children, especially most of them are malnourished, he says. Shauna, a pregnant 34-year-old who goes by her first name only, is also in in the queue with her 3 young children. She is due in September and anxious about the future. My children are miserable. They're suffering in every possible way. I can't even afford a packet of biscuits or milk from my babies. So looking at some of the typical prices, we have, for example, in previous, rice was 155 rupees, raised to 240. Fish was 350, raising to 820. Apples were 80, now rising to 200. And sugar from 120 to 350. Shana's husband, who is a labourer, earns just £8.20 a week to support the entire family. Our leaders are living better lives. If their children are living happily, why can't my children? She asks. By the time Shana's child is born, things are expected to get worse. Mayor of Colombo recently said that the capital has enough food only until September. With shortages of fuel and cooking gas and daily power cuts, families are unable to travel to buy fresh food or prepare hot meals. Families can't buy what they used to buy. They're cutting down on meals. They're cutting down on nutritious food. So we are definitely getting into a situation where malnutrition is a major concern, said Christian Shog, UNICEF's representative in Sri Lanka. We're trying to avoid a humanitarian crisis. We're not yet at children dying, which is good, but we need to get the support very urgently to avoid that. UNICEF has appealed for urgent financial aid to treat thousands of children with acute malnutrition and to support 1 million others with primary health care. Acute malnutrition rates could rise from 30% to 20%, with the number of severely malnourished children currently 35,000, doubling, says Dr. Renuka Jayatisa, president of the Sri Lanka Medical Nutrition Association. The crisis has brought forth a sense of solidarity, with people often relying on the kindness of strangers, but even kindness and hope are becoming precious commodities. Dr. Samana Kumara at Colombo's Castle Street Hospital says that if not for the goodwill of donors, his patients' tiny newborns would not have been in a great state. He says his hospital is now completely dependent on donations for essential medicines and equipment, and urged more donors to come forward as patients' lives are in danger. Back at the community kitchen, Chandrika is scooping the last morsel of food into her son's mouths. My best days are done, but our children have so much ahead of them, she says. I don't know what will happen as they grow up. All of Wales' 7 health boards are either insisting or encouraging the use of face masks during hospital visits. Withbush Hospital in Haverfordshire, Pembrokeshire, has gone further by reinstating a temporary ban on visits. Howell Didder Health Board in West and Mid Wales is the latest to require use of masks following a rise in COVID infections. Aaron Bevan asked people to stay away from its hospitals unless absolutely necessary due to extreme pressures. The health board did not mention COVID as a reason for this latest appeal. Wales has seen a rise in infections in the last month, with 1 in 30 people testing positive, according to the Office of National Statistics. This is also reflected in a rise in patients testing positive for COVID in hospital, while more are catching it whilst in hospital. However, the most recent figures still show 88% of patients testing positive for COVID are apparently being treated for something else. Anna and Bevan health boards, both in Wales, asked people to wear masks at their hospitals last month, as did Betsy Cadwallader Health Board, which covers the North, and Swansea Bay Health Board. Cardiff and Vale Health Board followed suit. Towers Teaching Health Board has required visitors to wear face masks for some time. Anna and Bevan, which covers Blaenau, Gwent, Caerphilly, Monmouthshire, Newport, Torfaen and South Powys, said the emergency department at the Grange University Hospital in Cumbrian remains very busy on Monday evening. It asked people to attend only if they have a life-threatening illness or serious injury. Anyone with a less serious issue is asked to visit a minor injury unit in Newport, Abergavenny or Ebwyn Vale. Hywel Day are now encouraging staff and contractors to have a lateral flow test and report the result twice a week. We've made the decision to reinforce these measurements at Withbush Hospital to reduce the risk to our patients and staff, said Mandy Rayani, Director of Nursing Quality and Patient Experience. We can all continue to take proactive protective measures to reduce the risk of transmission of COVID-19 to protect vulnerable people and the NHS. People are also asked to attend outpatient clinics alone at Withbush. A designated partner can attend antenatal appointments or scans at Withbush Hospital, midwifery-led unit, and any visits considered necessary through agreement with a ward sister or charge nurse. Monmouth GP Dr. Rowena Christmas said COVID was still very much with us, with 6 residents at one care home home testing positive despite its best interest, protect everyone. We've got lots and lots of patients with symptoms, which that could well be COVID, she told Claire Summers on BBC Radio Wales. We've got staff members off sick again testing positive. Right now, if we could get our masks back on, and I hate to say this, but avoid hugs and kisses with anyone who isn't our immediate contacts as much as you possibly can.